Delegates, observers, and journalists on Monday face long delays entering the huge conference venue for the COP26 Climate Conference beside the River Clyde in Glasgow.
Thousands queued in a chill wind to get through a bottleneck at the entrance to the venue long before security. Some are already turning back and deciding to work from hotel, concerned they will miss the negotiation meetings. Meanwhile, the leaders of Britain and the United Nations are welcoming scores of world leaders to Glasgow amid gloom over the meeting's chances of agreeing new measures to limit global warming. The greetings were due to go on for hours, since more than 120 leaders are coming to Glasgow for the first 2 days of the 12-day summit.
And now, VOA's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara is joining us live from Glasgow to talk further about the COP26 Climate Conference.
Yep. Good evening from Jakarta, Patsy. We understand that it's a chill wind in there. It's 12 p.m. We want to know how are the negotiations going so far over there?
Well, I think as you mentioned in your earlier report, many of us are staying outside of Glasgow because it's just such a crazy packed situation there. And with COVID restrictions, it's very difficult to get anywhere. So right now I'm in the beautiful city of Edinburgh, about an hour away, where the White House is placing all the journalists before they pile us onto a bus in a couple of hours, and we'll head over to Glasgow for President Joe Biden's press conference. And the mood overall for the summit is somewhat desperate and also urgent. And there's also a sense of pessimism because it's going to be a really tough 12 days of negotiation for representatives of more than 120 countries to get to agreement on what to do to cap global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. A couple of things that are relatively big that have been achieved on this second day of the summit. The first one is countries including Indonesia and the U.S., as well as a number of other big players, have agreed to stop deforestation by 2030. Now, this is a landmark agreement, but don't forget that in 2014, we also already had that agreement where the world leaders have agreed to stop or to slow down deforestation, and that has really done nothing to slow the process. So a lot of this is a question mark in terms of pledges, but in terms of action, it's really remains to be seen whether or not it will be translated as such.
Yes, definitely. That is the big question that we are all crossing our fingers and hoping will reach into something conclusive. Now, Patsy, yesterday, very interesting, President Biden met with President Jokowi. What can you tell us about the meeting?
Yeah, so this is a big issue for the U.S. in terms of building relationship with Indonesia as one of the biggest or the biggest Southeast Asian countries, the leader in ASEAN. And one of the issues that they discussed together is the two leaders really just want to stop this violence that's going on in Myanmar following the coup in February. Both leaders called on to the junta leader to bring all the parties together to basically return to the path of democracy. As you know, ASEAN leaders took a very unprecedented step in the ASEAN summit in October to essentially not involve or not have the junta military leader present at the summit. And this is, of course, very contrarian to the ASEAN principle of non-interference. Other than the issue of Myanmar, obviously the two leaders try to bring a convergence of views on issues including climate change, because that's a big thing in the COP26 summit, as well as a more equal and more just pandemic recovery, a very big issue for Indonesia as Indonesia heads to the G20 Summit in Bali next year. Indonesia will be taking over as the G20 presidency in December. And the other big issue is, of course, security in the region concerning freedom of navigation, concerning the rise of China's military activities in the Taiwan Straits. Indonesia has a very important role to play here, particularly as a leader of the group of Southeast Asian countries who essentially don't want any kind of great power rivalry to create any more hotspots in the region.
It's good to hear that a wide range of issues were covered in yesterday's meeting.
Yeah, and then it's interesting that you mentioned that the mood is kind of desperate over there, but actually is there any significant issue to be discussed related with the Asia Pacific, particularly Southeast Asia region, Patsy?
So I I mentioned already deforestation, which I think will impact a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia. Another one that countries, including in Southeast Asia, have been able to get together and on board is the Global Methane Pact. This is a call by U.S. President Joe Biden to reduce methane emission by 30%. And this should help significantly reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. However, the big disappointment that came into this COP26 is the fact that just a couple of days ago, the leaders of the G20, many of them, including Indonesia, have failed to agree on phasing out coal, domestic coal production and coal consumption. So that is the big disappointment here at COP26. But as far as Indo-Pacific, a number of sideline meetings have been arranged by Indonesian president as well as other Southeast Asian leaders, and many of them are staying here in Glasgow, are staying in Scotland. But some others are leaving. This will be the 2 days that President Joe Biden will be staying here, and I will be traveling with him back to Washington, D.C. He is scheduled to travel out tonight, and I'm coming back tomorrow.
Patsy, speaking of world leaders, the French President Emmanuel Macron and Prince Charles co-chaired a session on the Great Green Wall Initiative in Africa. Now, what can you tell us about it?
So this is an initiative that essentially tries to bring in more inclusivity and tries to bring in more climate justice to countries around the world. That's also another big theme here at COP26, particularly the push by developing nations to ask wealthy nations who have been the biggest polluters and who have been the one who have enjoyed a lot of economic progress by consuming fossil fuels. Meanwhile, developing nations are the one who is feeling the impacts of the ravages of climate change, and that's certainly an issue that's very important. That's been discussed by and been a point of contention actually in terms of getting the wealthy nations to fulfill their pledge of $100 billion per year in terms of climate financing.
Okay, and then Patsy, the last one. It's hard to say the optimistic that rise in the early stage of the COP26, but what else can we look forward to from COP26?
So I think one thing to remember is the fact that even though COP26 is the place where leaders can say, this is how much I'm pledging, this is what I can be doing in the country. One of the things that we need to remember is that these leaders will bring back these commitments back to their own legislative bodies if they are a democracy like Indonesia and like the U.S., and then they will have to get their parliaments and their Congress and their Senate to agree on these things. So even though a lot of things can be agreed at COP26, the proof is in the pudding, which means the proof is in the legislation coming back from summits like this, whether or not it can actually be translated into domestic laws and whether or not it can be implemented. As you know, mechanisms like COP26 is just a way for diplomats, for leaders to get together and say, okay, we're agreeing to do this, but later on we'll have to see, because there's really no enforcement mechanism. I mean, there is no global climate police body that's going to chase after these countries and say, hey, what happened to your commitments? So that's certainly something to look forward to. And the other thing is the role of the private sector, because they are key here in terms of trying to get the world to transition to more climate-friendly renewable energies and a number of other applications that they can use in order that together, not just government, but also the private sector can help the world reach towards that elusive goal of reducing global climate warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. At this point of negotiation, it's nowhere close to that. I'm hearing the numbers of 2.5, 2.7 degrees is where we are right now, which is certainly calamitous and certainly not enough to save the planet.
Yes, definitely. That there is no enforcing body is always one of the things that countries are always so reluctant to stick to what they agreed on in these meetings. But we still have to stay hopeful. And thank you and all the best. That was Patsy Widakuswara from VOA.
Yep,
thank you very
Patsy,
much for joining us.
For the report. And as you promised, we'll be back with other stories. Stay with us on Metro Globe Network.